Before we begin tonight's journey, if you enjoy relaxing history documentaries and peaceful bedtime stories, please take a moment to subscribe and leave a like. Your support helps this channel continue bringing the forgotten stories of the ancient world to life. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let your imagination drift back more than 1,000 years. Picture yourself walking along an old Roman road beneath a sky filled with stars. The cool night air carries the scent of wild grass, and the only sound is the gentle whisper of the wind. Ahead of you stands a great Roman city, but something feels different. Its grand gates are open, yet no one enters. Marble temples stand silent beneath the moonlight. Once busy streets are empty, fountains no longer flow, and ivy slowly climbs the walls where thousands of people once lived. It is hard to believe that this quiet place was once one of the greatest cities in the world. Here, merchants traded goods from distant lands, soldiers marched through magnificent gates, children laughed in crowded marketplaces, and magnificent baths echoed with conversation. So what happened? How did these thriving Roman cities become forgotten ruins during the Middle Ages? Why did people leave them behind, allowing nature to reclaim streets that had stood for centuries? Tonight, we'll uncover that remarkable story, not through battles alone, but through the slow passage of time, changing lives, and the quiet transformation of an empire. So, take a slow breath, relax, close your eyes if you wish, and let us begin our journey into the forgotten cities of medieval Europe. The morning sun rises over the city of Rome. Its golden light catches hundreds of rooftops before spilling across marble temples, triumphal arches, and elegant public squares. Smoke curls lazily from thousands of chimneys. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crows. A baker opens his wooden shutters. The smell of fresh bread drifts into narrow streets already filling with people. Merchants arrange colorful baskets of olives, figs, grapes, almonds, and freshly baked loaves. Blacksmiths hammer glowing iron. Potters shape wet clay upon spinning wheels. Mules pull heavy wagons over carefully paved stone roads. The city is alive. Every hour, new travelers enter through massive gates built generations earlier by emperors whose names are carved into stone. Some have journeyed from Britain, others from Egypt, others still from distant Syria. All roads truly seem to lead here. Rome is more than a city. It is the beating heart of an empire stretching across 3 continents. Its influence reaches snowy mountains, scorching deserts, thick forests, and endless coastlines. People speak dozens of languages, yet somehow business continues smoothly. Coins stamped with imperial portraits pass from countless hands every single day. Ships arrive continuously along the river Tiber carrying grain from North Africa, wine from Gaul, spices from Arabia, silk from distant lands beyond Persia, and marble from Greece. Everything seems connected. Everything feels permanent. If you had stood here in these peaceful morning hours, you might have believed that nothing could ever change. After all, generations had already lived and died beneath these same monuments. The mighty Colosseum still dominates the skyline. Its enormous stone walls rise like a mountain crafted by human hands. Years earlier, tens of thousands gathered inside to witness spectacles unlike anything else in the ancient world. Now, while the grand games have become less frequent, the building remains a symbol of Roman confidence. Nearby stands the Forum. This bustling center of politics, commerce, and conversation hums with activity from sunrise until dusk. Senators wrapped in white togas debate laws. Lawyers argue passionately before judges. Scribes hurry between government buildings carrying wax tablets covered with careful writing. Ordinary citizens pause to hear the latest news announced aloud. Life here feels orderly, predictable, strong. Water flows endlessly through magnificent aqueducts stretching for miles across the countryside. These engineering marvels bring fresh mountain water into every corner of the city. Public fountains never seem to run dry. Bathhouses remain warm throughout the year. Gardens flourish. Clean drinking water reaches neighborhoods rich and poor alike. Few civilizations before Rome had mastered water so completely. Inside enormous bath complexes, steam rises into high vaulted ceilings. People gather not merely to wash but to socialize. Friends exchange stories. Business deals are quietly negotiated. Philosophers debate ideas. Children splash happily in shallow pools. For many Romans, these baths are part of everyday life. As ordinary as breakfast, as familiar as sunset. Across the city, apartment buildings known as insulae tower several stories high. Most ordinary Romans live inside these crowded homes. Families cook meals over small hearths. Laundry hangs from windows. Voices drift through thin walls. Neighbors know one another well. Life can be noisy, busy, chaotic. Yet beneath the apparent disorder lies remarkable organization. Roads are maintained. Markets regulated. Taxes collected. Soldiers patrol. Messengers carry official letters with astonishing speed. Everything depends upon an enormous network of administrators, engineers, farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and laborers working together. Beyond Rome itself, hundreds of Roman cities flourish across Europe. Each reflects the same careful planning. Straight streets intersect at right angles. Forums occupy central squares. Temples overlook marketplaces. Public baths welcome citizens. Aqueducts deliver fresh water. Stone bridges span rivers. Defensive walls surround neighborhoods. Whether you visited Londinium in Britain, Lugdunum in Gaul, Carthage in North Africa, or Antioch in the eastern provinces, familiar Roman architecture greeted you. Every city carried a piece of Rome. Every stone proclaimed imperial confidence. Travel itself had become easier than almost anywhere else in the ancient world. Roman roads stretched nearly 250,000 miles. Constructed layer upon layer with crushed stone, gravel, and carefully fitted paving blocks, many remained usable for centuries. Merchants pushed wagons filled with pottery. Soldiers marched in disciplined columns. Pilgrims journeyed toward distant shrines. Messengers carried imperial commands. Each mile marker reminded travelers whose empire maintained these remarkable highways. Even after sunset, city life rarely stopped completely. Oil lamps glowed behind wooden shutters. Families gathered around evening meals. Storytellers entertained listeners. Musicians played gentle melodies upon flutes and lyres. Some citizens lingered in taverns discussing politics. Others climbed rooftops to escape the day's lingering heat. Above them stretched a sky filled with stars that looked much the same as ours tonight. For ordinary Romans, tomorrow promised another ordinary day. The baker would bake. The mason would build. The teacher would teach. The merchant would bargain. Children would laugh. Water would flow. The empire would endure. Or so they believed. History often surprises us because people living through it rarely recognize the beginning of great change. Empires seldom collapse in a single dramatic moment. Instead, they weaken quietly. One harvest fails. One emperor dies. One road receives fewer repairs. One marketplace grows slightly smaller than before. Each change seems temporary. Each problem appears manageable. Few people realize they are witnessing history turning. The Roman world would not disappear in one terrible night. Instead, it would slowly unravel across generations. Children would grow into adults remembering a slightly busier city than the one before them. Grandchildren would inherit neighborhoods where abandoned houses stood beside occupied ones. Stone by stone, street by street, city by city, the transformation had already begun. Although magnificent buildings still stood proudly beneath the morning sun, invisible cracks were spreading beneath the surface of Roman society. The empire had become enormous, perhaps too enormous. Its borders stretched farther than any ruler could easily defend. Thousands of miles separated distant provinces from the imperial capital. Messages that once traveled efficiently now sometimes arrived too late. Local governors gained increasing independence. Frontier soldiers faced growing pressure from neighboring peoples seeking safer lands, better farmland, or protection from conflicts farther east. Meanwhile, maintaining Roman cities required extraordinary resources. Aqueducts demanded constant repairs. Roads deteriorated beneath endless traffic. Bridges weathered floods. Public buildings aged. Bathhouses consumed enormous quantities of firewood. Fountains depended upon complex systems of channels and reservoirs. Every magnificent structure needed countless workers to maintain it. As long as trade flourished and taxes flowed steadily, this vast machine continued turning. But no machine lasts forever. Small interruptions slowly became larger ones. Economic uncertainty spread. Inflation reduced the value of money. Some merchants closed their shops. Certain public buildings received delayed repairs. Cracks appeared in walls once considered indestructible. To many citizens, these seemed like ordinary inconveniences. No one imagined entire cities might someday vanish. Yet history has a curious way of hiding its greatest turning points within ordinary days. A mason repairing loose stones could not know his grandchildren might dismantle abandoned temples simply to build modest cottages. A senator debating taxes could not imagine wolves someday wandering through empty forums. A child laughing beside a public fountain could never picture ivy swallowing marble statues centuries later. For now, however, the city still breathes. Its bells ring. Its markets bustle. Its fountains sparkle beneath the afternoon sun. The Roman world remains magnificent. But the quiet wind carries with it the first whispers of change. And in our next chapter, those whispers will slowly become impossible to ignore. As emperors rise and fall, frontiers begin to crumble, and the world's greatest urban civilization starts its long journey into silence. For now, rest here in this final peaceful afternoon of Rome's greatness. Listen to the gentle splash of water, the distant murmur of merchants, the rhythmic footsteps upon ancient stone. For these sounds, once so ordinary, will not last forever. The first signs were easy to ignore. If you had been standing in the center of a prosperous Roman city during the 2nd century, surrounded by marble temples and bustling marketplaces, you would have struggled to imagine that such a place could ever fade away. Merchants still argued over prices beneath elegant stone colonnades. Children chased one another through the forum. Water still poured endlessly from magnificent fountains fed by distant aqueducts. Everything appeared permanent. After all, Rome had survived wars, rebellions, and countless political changes. For generations, the empire seemed as unshakable as the mountains themselves. Yet history often changes quietly. It rarely announces itself with a single dramatic moment. Instead, the greatest transformations begin as tiny cracks that spread unnoticed across the strongest foundations. And that is exactly how the Roman world began to change. As you settle deeper into this story, imagine the warm afternoon sun slowly sinking over the tiled rooftops of a Roman town. Long shadows stretch across smooth stone streets. Somewhere in the distance, a blacksmith's hammer rings against glowing iron. The smell of fresh bread drifts from a nearby bakery. Everything feels peaceful. But beneath that peaceful surface, invisible pressures are already building. For nearly 2 centuries, the Roman Empire had expanded almost without interruption. Every new conquest brought fresh supplies of gold, grain, slaves, and taxes. Wealth flowed toward the cities like rivers feeding a great lake. Then the expansion stopped. There were fewer victories to celebrate. Fewer caravans returned carrying unimaginable treasures from distant lands. The empire had reached the limits of practical conquest. Without constant expansion, maintaining such an enormous territory became increasingly expensive. Roads required repairs. Bridges needed rebuilding. Aqueducts demanded constant maintenance. Thousands of miles of defensive walls had to be guarded day and night. The mighty Roman army, once financed by endless conquest, now depended almost entirely upon taxation. Taxes slowly rose. For wealthy landowners, the burden was uncomfortable. For ordinary farmers, craftsmen, and merchants, it became overwhelming. Some abandoned their businesses entirely. Others quietly left the cities in search of simpler lives in the countryside, where survival depended less upon imperial officials and more upon the rhythm of nature. The bustling streets became ever so slightly quieter. No one noticed at first. Then came politics. The Roman Empire had always been vast, but governing millions of people across 3 continents was an impossible challenge for any single ruler. After the reign of the great emperors, succession became increasingly uncertain. Generals proclaimed themselves emperor. Soldiers crowned their commanders. Rival armies marched not against foreign enemies, but against fellow Romans. Within only a few decades, emperors rose and fell with astonishing speed. Some ruled for years. Others ruled for mere months. A few never even reached Rome before meeting violent ends. Each civil war drained the empire's wealth. Fields went untilled. Trade routes became dangerous. Cities that once relied on predictable shipments of grain found themselves waiting longer and longer for supplies that sometimes never arrived. In prosperous towns, merchants began storing food instead of selling it. Prices climbed. Families worried. The great certainty that had defined Roman life slowly began to disappear. Imagine standing in the Forum now. The marketplace still functions, but conversations have changed. People no longer discuss festivals alone. They whisper about distant battles. They wonder who will be emperor next month. They ask whether taxes will rise again. Uncertainty hangs in the air like approaching rain. Then came inflation. Roman coins had once been trusted across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. Silver denarii passed confidently from one hand to another. But desperate governments facing enormous military costs began reducing the precious metal inside their coins. Each new coin contained slightly less silver. The difference seemed small, yet people noticed. Soon merchants demanded more coins for the same goods. Prices rose rapidly. Savings lost their value. Confidence disappeared. An ordinary baker who had once earned enough to comfortably support his family suddenly discovered that yesterday's wages bought only half as much grain. The market became unpredictable. Trust, the invisible foundation of every economy, began to crumble. Still, Roman cities endured. Their stone buildings remained magnificent. Their monuments continued to inspire awe. But beneath those impressive facades, daily life grew steadily more difficult. Then another challenge emerged from beyond the empire's frontiers. Across the forests and plains north of Rome lived dozens of different peoples whom Roman writers often called barbarians. The word itself could be misleading. These communities were not identical. Some traded peacefully with Rome for generations. Others served proudly within Roman armies. Many admired Roman culture and eagerly adopted Roman customs. Yet the borders separating the empire from its neighbors became increasingly unstable. Climate shifts, population movements, competition for resources, and pressure from even more distant nomadic groups all combined to push entire communities toward Roman territory. The empire had faced migrations before, but now the movement of people became larger and more difficult to manage. Roman officials attempted diplomacy. Some newcomers received land in exchange for military service. Others were turned away. Still others crossed the frontiers without permission. Tension grew. Then came one of history's most dramatic turning points. In the late 4th century, the arrival of the Huns from the eastern steppes sent shockwaves across Europe. Entire Germanic communities fled westward, seeking refuge inside Roman borders. What began as migration soon became conflict. The Roman military, already stretched thin by internal struggles, struggled to respond effectively. Frontier defenses weakened. Some cities that had once known generations of peace suddenly found themselves preparing for siege. Thick defensive walls were repaired. Old watchtowers reopened. Citizens stored food. The cheerful confidence of earlier centuries slowly vanished. Even those far from the borders sensed that the world was changing. News traveled along Roman roads. Travelers carried stories. Merchants repeated alarming rumors. Every tale seemed slightly more frightening than the last. Whether true or exaggerated hardly mattered. Fear spreads quickly, especially when uncertainty already fills people's hearts. Then, in the year 410, something happened that many Romans believed impossible. The city of Rome itself was sacked by the Visigoths. Although the physical destruction was less complete than many later imagined, the psychological impact was enormous. For nearly 800 years, Rome had stood as the heart of an empire. Now the eternal city had fallen to foreign warriors. Across distant provinces, people struggled to comprehend the news. If Rome itself could be attacked, was anywhere truly safe? Confidence weakened even further. Some wealthy families quietly abandoned urban homes in favor of fortified country estates. Rural villas expanded. Local communities became increasingly self-sufficient. Long-distance trade slowly declined. Without reliable trade, many cities found it difficult to survive. The magnificent public baths required enormous quantities of firewood and constant repairs. Aqueducts demanded skilled engineers. Paved streets needed maintenance. Drainage systems required cleaning. All these marvels depended upon functioning governments and stable tax revenues. When those systems weakened, the cities themselves began to change. The fountains stopped flowing. Some bathhouses closed their doors forever. Grass appeared between paving stones. Small sections of collapsed buildings remained unrepaired. The transformation happened slowly enough that many residents barely noticed. Each year looked much like the last. Only decades later would someone realize how profoundly everything had changed. Children born during this era accepted these quieter cities as normal. They had never seen the crowded forums their grandparents remembered. To them, abandoned temples were simply old buildings. Empty marketplaces were familiar landscapes. The glorious past survived mostly in stories told by aging relatives. Stories of festivals that filled every street. Stories of crowded theaters echoing with laughter. Stories of endless caravans arriving from every corner of the empire. Those memories gradually faded, stone by stone, generation by generation. The Roman cities did not vanish overnight. They drifted into silence, like a great song whose final notes linger softly in the evening air before disappearing into stillness. And as night settled over the empire, the lights that once illuminated thousands of thriving towns grew fewer with each passing year. The greatest cities ever built by the ancient world were entering their long, quiet sleep, one from which many would not awaken for centuries. The difference seemed small, yet people noticed. Soon merchants demanded more coins for the same goods. Prices rose rapidly. Savings lost their value. Confidence disappeared. An ordinary baker who had once earned enough to comfortably support his family suddenly discovered that yesterday's wages bought only half as much grain. The market became unpredictable. Trust, the invisible foundation of every economy, began to crumble. Still, Roman cities endured. Their stone buildings remained magnificent. Their monuments continued to inspire awe. But beneath those impressive facades, daily life grew steadily more difficult. Then another challenge emerged from beyond the empire's frontiers. Across the forests and plains north of Rome lived dozens of different peoples whom Roman writers often called barbarians. The word itself could be misleading. These communities were not identical. Some traded peacefully with Rome for generations. Others served proudly within Roman armies. Many admired Roman culture and eagerly adopted Roman customs. Yet the borders separating the empire from its neighbors became increasingly unstable. Climate shifts, population movements, competition for resources, and pressure from even more distant nomadic groups all combined to push entire communities toward Roman territory. The empire had faced migrations before, but now the movement of people became larger and more difficult to manage. Roman officials attempted diplomacy. Some newcomers received land in exchange for military service. Others were turned away. Still others crossed the frontiers without permission. Tension grew. Then came one of history's most dramatic turning points. In the late 4th century, the arrival of the Huns from the eastern steppes sent shockwaves across Europe. Entire Germanic communities fled westward, seeking refuge inside Roman borders. What began as migration soon became conflict. The Roman military, already stretched thin by internal struggles, struggled to respond effectively. Frontier defenses weakened. Some cities that had once known generations of peace suddenly found themselves preparing for siege. Thick defensive walls were repaired. Old watchtowers reopened. Citizens stored food. The cheerful confidence of earlier centuries slowly vanished. Even those far from the borders sensed that the world was changing. News traveled along Roman roads. Travelers carried stories. Merchants repeated alarming rumors. Every tale seemed slightly more frightening than the last. Whether true or exaggerated hardly mattered. Fear spreads quickly, especially when uncertainty already fills people's hearts. Then, in the year 410, something happened that many Romans believed impossible. The city of Rome itself was sacked by the Visigoths. Although the physical destruction was less complete than many later imagined, the psychological impact was enormous. For nearly 800 years, Rome had stood as the heart of an empire. Now the eternal city had fallen to foreign warriors. Across distant provinces, people struggled to comprehend the news. If Rome itself could be attacked, was anywhere truly safe? Confidence weakened even further. Some wealthy families quietly abandoned urban homes in favor of fortified country estates. Rural villas expanded. Local communities became increasingly self-sufficient. Long-distance trade slowly declined. Without reliable trade, many cities found it difficult to survive. The magnificent public baths required enormous quantities of firewood and constant repairs. Aqueducts demanded skilled engineers. Paved streets needed maintenance. Drainage systems required cleaning. All these marvels depended upon functioning governments and stable tax revenues. When those systems weakened, the cities themselves began to change. The fountains stopped flowing. Some bathhouses closed their doors forever. Grass appeared between paving stones. Small sections of collapsed buildings remained unrepaired. The transformation happened slowly enough that many residents barely noticed. Each year looked much like the last. Only decades later would someone realize how profoundly everything had changed. Children born during this era accepted these quieter cities as normal. They had never seen the crowded forums their grandparents remembered. To them, abandoned temples were simply old buildings. Empty marketplaces were familiar landscapes. The glorious past survived mostly in stories told by aging relatives. Stories of festivals that filled every street. Stories of crowded theaters echoing with laughter. Stories of endless caravans arriving from every corner of the empire. Those memories gradually faded, stone by stone, generation by generation. The Roman cities did not vanish overnight. They drifted into silence, like a great song whose final notes linger softly in the evening air before disappearing into stillness. And as night settled over the empire, the lights that once illuminated thousands of thriving towns grew fewer with each passing year. The greatest cities ever built by the ancient world were entering their long, quiet sleep, one from which many would not awaken for centuries. The night has grown quieter now. Imagine that the centuries have slipped away beneath your feet. The grand Roman Empire is long gone, and the echoes of its emperors have faded into distant memory. Around you lies a city that was once filled with merchants, senators, soldiers, and travelers from every corner of the Mediterranean. Now only the wind seems to remember their voices. As you continue your gentle walk through these forgotten streets, you may notice something unexpected. The Roman cities were not completely empty. Although many people had left, life had not vanished entirely. It had simply changed. Slowly, patiently, almost without anyone noticing. During the early Middle Ages, many Roman cities became much smaller than they had once been. Entire neighborhoods disappeared into silence while only a few families remained within ancient walls. The enormous forums where thousands once gathered now stood mostly deserted. Grass grew between marble paving stones. Wildflowers appeared where senators had once debated laws. Broken columns leaned at strange angles, their polished surfaces softened by centuries of rain and moss. Yet among these ruins, ordinary people continued living their quiet lives. A farmer might lead his ox through what had once been a magnificent Roman boulevard. Children chased chickens beneath towering triumphal arches whose original purpose they no longer understood. To them, these enormous monuments had always existed. They were simply part of the landscape, no different from a hill or an old tree. Many medieval villagers had no idea who had built the massive stone structures surrounding them. Stories began to replace history. Some believed giants had raised the walls. Others imagined ancient kings with magical powers. There were tales of forgotten races whose strength far exceeded that of ordinary humans. Without written records reaching every village, imagination often filled the empty spaces left behind by memory. One of the most remarkable examples could be found in Rome itself. The mighty Colosseum still stood. Though damaged by earthquakes and neglect, its vast stone arches continued to dominate the skyline. But it no longer echoed with cheering crowds. Instead, it became something entirely different. Small homes appeared inside its walls. Families built wooden houses against the ancient stone. Gardens filled sections of the arena floor. Goats wandered beneath the same arches where gladiators had once waited before entering combat. Life adapted itself to the ruins rather than attempting to restore them. Across Europe, similar transformations unfolded. In the southern regions of France, old Roman amphitheaters became fortified villages. Their thick stone walls offered protection during uncertain times. People discovered that structures originally built for entertainment could also defend them from raids. The curved seating areas became foundations for homes. Ancient entrances became medieval gates. The buildings found entirely new purposes. Roman baths experienced another fate. Once they had been places of warmth, conversation, and relaxation. Hot water flowed through ingenious systems hidden beneath marble floors. Steam drifted through elegant halls while citizens discussed politics, philosophy, and business. Now those pipes had long since broken. Without constant maintenance, the engineering marvels gradually failed. Many bathhouses collapsed. Others became workshops. Blacksmiths hammered iron where bathers had once soaked in heated pools. Potters shaped clay beside empty fountains. Storage rooms replaced luxurious bathing chambers. The buildings continued serving communities, although in ways their original architects could never have imagined. Roman temples also underwent profound changes. As Christianity spread across Europe, many pagan temples lost their religious purpose. Rather than destroying every sacred building, medieval communities often transformed them. Columns remained standing. Stone walls continued protecting those inside. Only the purpose changed. Altars dedicated to Jupiter, Mars, or Venus disappeared. In their place came Christian churches. Candles replaced offerings. Hymns replaced ancient prayers. The same stone roofs sheltered entirely different beliefs. Sometimes these churches preserved Roman architecture almost by accident. Builders recognized that ancient foundations were strong. Marble columns were expensive to replace. Rather than beginning again, they simply adapted what already existed. Even today, visitors walking through parts of Italy can discover churches that still contain columns carved nearly 2,000 years ago. The past quietly supporting the present. Not every building was so fortunate. Throughout the Middle Ages, Roman ruins became valuable stone quarries. Imagine looking at a magnificent marble temple whose priests had vanished centuries earlier. Its roof had collapsed, its purpose forgotten. To medieval builders, it represented something practical. An enormous supply of perfectly cut stone. Why spend months carving fresh blocks from distant mountains when thousands already lay waiting nearby? Slowly, piece by piece, ancient monuments disappeared. Marble columns became castle walls. Temple stones became monasteries. Decorative statues were broken apart to produce lime for mortar. Beautiful inscriptions vanished beneath fresh plaster. It may sound tragic to modern ears. Yet medieval people were not attempting to destroy history. Most simply needed homes, churches, bridges, defensive walls. They reused what previous generations had left behind, just as countless societies have done throughout history. Even the mighty Roman roads continued serving travelers. Although many received little maintenance, their foundations remained astonishingly durable. Built from carefully layered stone, gravel, and sand, some roads survived for centuries after imperial authority disappeared. Merchants still guided wagons along them. Pilgrims followed their routes toward holy shrines. Kings marched armies across the same highways once traveled by Roman legions. The empire had fallen. Its roads refused to disappear. Sometimes the old roads determined where entirely new medieval towns would emerge. Crossroads remained useful. Bridges continued connecting rivers. Human movement naturally followed paths established hundreds of years earlier. History quietly shaped the future beneath every passing footstep. Meanwhile, nature never stopped its patient work. Trees rooted themselves inside cracked walls. Birds nested beneath broken rooftops. Foxes slipped silently through abandoned villas during moonlit nights. Rain collected inside empty courtyards. Winter frost widened every fracture. Spring flowers softened every ruin. Nature showed no anger toward Rome, only endless patience, season after season, century after century. In places where no people remained, forests gradually reclaimed entire neighborhoods. Travelers sometimes stumbled upon forgotten walls hidden beneath thick vegetation. Stone towers emerged unexpectedly from the trees like silent ghosts watching over the landscape. Many legends were born in these lonely places. People spoke of haunted cities, hidden treasures, sleeping emperors, lost armies, ancient curses. Ruins inspired wonder because they hinted at a civilization so vast that medieval people could scarcely imagine it. Who could have built such enormous arches? Who carved these perfect columns? Who carried stones weighing many tons? Without detailed historical knowledge, imagination often provided more satisfying answers than reality. Monks became some of the few individuals preserving fragments of Rome's memory. Inside quiet monasteries, they carefully copied ancient manuscripts by candlelight. Hour after hour, day after day, year after year. Their careful handwriting preserved works by Roman historians, philosophers, poets, and scholars. Many probably never realized how important their work would become. They were simply preserving knowledge. Yet because of their patience, countless ancient texts survived while cities themselves crumbled. Books became stronger than stone. Ideas traveled further than marble monuments. Even as buildings disappeared, memories endured upon parchment. Medieval craftsmen also inherited subtle pieces of Roman knowledge. Some techniques survived through practice rather than written instruction. Stone masons continued learning from older builders. Bridge construction evolved using ancient foundations. Farmers unknowingly cultivated fields first organized during Roman times. The empire's influence remained woven into everyday life, even when people no longer recognized its origins. Language itself carried echoes of Rome. Latin gradually transformed into new languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian. Each evolved slowly across generations like rivers branching from a common source. Although the empire vanished politically, its words continued living upon countless lips. Every conversation carried faint whispers of ancient Rome. Perhaps that is one of history's quietest lessons. Civilizations rarely disappear all at once. Instead, they change. They become something new. A temple becomes a church. An amphitheater becomes a village. A road becomes a country lane. A forgotten language becomes several new ones. The people of the Middle Ages were not merely living among Roman ruins. They were building a new world from the old one's foundations, stone by stone, generation after generation. Without fully realizing it, they carried pieces of Rome into the future. And so, as the moon continues rising over these peaceful ruins, imagine a single candle glowing inside a modest medieval home built against an ancient Roman wall. A mother quietly prepares bread. A child drifts toward sleep. Outside, ivy climbs over weathered marble that once reflected the glory of emperors. The old empire rests beneath the quiet rhythms of ordinary life. Not entirely forgotten, not fully remembered, simply transformed. And in that transformation lies one of history's gentlest truths. Nothing truly remains unchanged. Yet very little is ever completely lost. The stones endure. The roads continue. The words survive. And beneath the calm silence of the medieval night, the heart of Rome still beats, softly, patiently, almost too quietly to hear. As our journey draws to a close, allow your breathing to become slow and steady once more. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of an ancient Roman city just as dawn begins to paint the eastern sky with soft shades of gold and pale blue. The air is cool, carrying only the faint scent of damp earth and wild herbs growing between stones that have not felt the footsteps of an empire for centuries. Nothing rushes here anymore. No merchants are shouting across the marketplace. No senators hurry toward the forum. No soldiers march in perfect formation along roads that once connected half the known world. Only silence remains. Yet this silence is not empty. It is filled with memories. Every broken column once held up magnificent temples. Every cracked stone beneath your feet once echoed with the footsteps of thousands of ordinary people. Bakers waking before sunrise, children chasing one another through narrow streets, scholars debating philosophy beneath shaded porticos, and travelers arriving after journeys of hundreds of miles. Empires often seem eternal while they exist. To the people living in the 4th century, Rome must have appeared indestructible. Its aqueducts carried fresh water across impossible distances. Its roads stretched farther than anyone could easily imagine. Its cities sparkled with marble, fountains, bathhouses, libraries, and bustling markets. Few could have believed that these magnificent places would someday become quiet fields where sheep grazed peacefully among broken statues. History reminds us that no civilization remains unchanged forever. The abandonment of Roman cities was not a single dramatic event but a slow transformation stretching across generations. Families moved away one by one. Buildings fell into disrepair little by little. Roof tiles slipped during winter storms. Wooden beams rotted. Trees found tiny cracks in stone and patiently widened them year after year. Nature never hurried. She simply waited. And eventually she reclaimed what people could no longer maintain. Yet something remarkable also happened. Although many Roman cities became deserted, Rome itself never truly disappeared. Its knowledge survived. Its language evolved. Its laws influenced kingdoms yet unborn. Latin gradually transformed into Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. Roman engineering inspired medieval builders. Roman law became the foundation of legal systems across much of Europe. Even today, many government buildings borrow architectural ideas first perfected by Roman craftsmen nearly 2,000 years ago. The empire vanished. Its legacy did not. Imagine now wandering through a forgotten amphitheater sometime during the 12th century. Grass grows where audiences once cheered gladiators. Wildflowers bloom between marble seats. Birds have built nests beneath weathered arches. A shepherd rests quietly in the shade, unaware that emperors once addressed crowds from this very place. To him, these ruins are simply part of the landscape. Ancient history has already become legend. Children growing up nearby hear stories about giants who supposedly built these enormous walls. Others believe magical beings raised the monuments during forgotten ages. Few understand that these stones were carefully placed by ordinary workers using remarkable skill, patience, and determination. As centuries pass, memories fade. Facts become myths. Then, during the Renaissance, curious minds begin asking questions once again. Who built these ruins? Why were they abandoned? What lessons still sleep beneath layers of earth? Artists carefully sketch broken temples. Scholars translate forgotten Latin manuscripts. Architects measure ancient columns with astonishing precision. Slowly, the lost world begins to awaken, not through conquest or empire, but through curiosity. Excavations uncover colorful mosaics hidden beneath collapsed roofs. Coins emerge from forgotten wells. Clay lamps, children's toys, kitchen utensils, and writing tablets appear beneath centuries of dust. These simple discoveries tell stories that grand monuments never could. They remind us that history belongs not only to emperors and generals but also to ordinary people. A mother preparing bread, a father repairing a sandal, a child laughing in the street, a merchant carefully counting coins before sunset. They too shaped history. Their lives were quiet, their dreams familiar, their worries surprisingly similar to our own. Perhaps this is why ancient cities continue to fascinate us. We recognize ourselves within them. Technology changes, clothing changes, languages change, but human hopes remain remarkably constant. People have always searched for safety, for friendship, for purpose, for home. The abandoned Roman cities scattered across Europe remind us that greatness is never measured solely by magnificent buildings. Stone eventually crumbles. Bronze eventually corrodes. Even marble yields to rain, frost, and growing roots. What truly endures are ideas. Knowledge passed from one generation to another. Stories remembered around evening fires. Acts of kindness that leave invisible marks upon countless lives. As you continue walking through these peaceful ruins in your imagination, notice how beautiful they have become. Morning sunlight gently touches weathered columns. Small birds sing from ancient rooftops that no longer exist. Vines embrace old walls rather than destroying them. Nature and history exist together now, no longer as rivals but as companions. The city has not died. It has simply changed. Every season brings new life. Spring flowers bloom where senators once debated. Summer grasses wave across forgotten courtyards. Autumn leaves drift through roofless basilicas. Winter frost quietly outlines stones laid by hands long returned to dust. Time continues its patient work, always moving, never rushing. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson these abandoned Roman cities offer us. Everything changes. Every generation inherits the achievements of those who came before while creating something new for those who will follow. The Romans themselves inherited ideas from the Greeks. Medieval builders inherited the roads and stones of Rome. Modern cities still follow ancient street plans first drawn nearly 2 millennia ago. History is not a series of endings. It is an endless conversation across time. One civilization speaks, another listens, then answers in its own way. And so, as night settles gently over these ancient ruins once more, the stars appear above exactly as they did for Roman citizens centuries ago. The constellations remain unchanged. The moon still rises above broken temples. A cool breeze moves softly through empty archways. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls into the darkness. The city rests peacefully beneath the endless sky. Its people are gone. Its empire has passed into history. Yet its story continues to whisper through every weathered stone, every surviving road, every arch that still stands against the passing centuries. Thank you for taking this quiet journey into the forgotten world of medieval Rome and the abandoned cities of an empire that once shaped the course of history. As your thoughts begin to drift, leave behind the crumbling walls, the silent forums, and the ivy-covered temples. Carry with you only the calm rhythm of history itself, a reminder that even the greatest civilizations become part of the landscape, yet their stories continue to guide those willing to listen. May the peaceful echoes of ancient Rome accompany you into a restful night. And as sleep gently arrives, imagine the first light of another morning falling across those timeless ruins, where history never truly ends. It simply waits quietly for the next curious traveler to wander by.